So this is the second video on dot point 1.1.5. This dot point is probably the largest for the whole year. It does encompass so many different skills. In the last video, we looked at the basic percentage structure. Today, we're going to be looking at profit or loss in absolute percentage terms, so percentage profit, percentage loss. And we're going to look at simple interest, and also we're looking at commission. So that sort of falls into the wages section, and the cost of hiring someone or the cost of commission on, for say, buying a house. So they're the three we're going to focus on in this video. The next video will look at some more simple interest and then finally compound interest. So this one dot point will actually take 4 videos to fully explain. So it's quite a significant point in your syllabus. So we'll start with commission. There are some industries that work pretty heavily on commission. These are like real estate, car salespersons, even your electronics. They generally work on commission. Commission is that you actually get a percentage of what you sell into your wage. So real estate people and car salesmen, they're really in your face. They want you to buy things. That's because they actually get a percentage of what they sell. In local employers like JB Hi-Fi and Harvey Norman also do commission. It's obviously quite small, a lot smaller than what the bigger industries would do. So the basic formula for commission is as follows. So there are 2 different formula depending on which rate you like to use. So if you have your rate as a decimal, which is what I'll be recommending throughout the finance section of this course, you use the top one. If you prefer to keep your rate as a percentage, you use this one. So anytime you put in a percentage into a formula, you have to have the divide by 100 to convert it. We talked about in the previous videos, percentages don't do much for us in calculations. Now with your Casio e-activities, most of the e-activities are set for you to put it in as a percentage. The Casio e-activities are made to be as simple as possible, so you're inputting very easy numbers. So they set it so you can put it in as a percentage. So when you look at the e-activity equation, it will look like this. However, it's very important that you know if you're doing sort of a non-calculator situation, my recommendation would be using this one, converting the commission rate to a decimal first to then use it. Now, the other part of the equation is what we call the retainer. Now, the retainer is their basic weekly, monthly, or yearly, depending on what the situation is, wage. Obviously, you can't just rely on selling things. If real estate agents only got paid if they sold a house, they would obviously struggle throughout the year unless they make a big sale. So generally those people get a small wage with the idea that they sell more, they get a better wage. So the retainer is normally a lot lower than what sort of a similar career or a similar workplace would be at, because they get that extra bonus if they sell things. So that's the retainer side of things. So let's try an example. Okay, so a car salesperson receives a retainer of $2,780, so that's what he gets every month regardless, and plus 2% of his monthly sales. If he sells $181,200 worth of car parts or accessories or cars, what is his monthly wage? So putting that into our formula that we've been shown above, we have the wage is going to equal his sales, so $181,200. Multiplied by his commission rate. I'm going to convert that to a decimal because I'm doing my working here, which would be 0.02. And then I'm going to add his retainer on top of that. So it's going to be the 2,780. That will come out that his wage will be the 6,404. Now, because this is a worded question, I always recommend that we have a worded answer with units. So his monthly wage will be $6,404. Okay, so always general rule with ATAR, worded question, some sort of context applied, you should have a worded answer with the context put back in there. it's probably the best way to remember to include units and to also check rounding. So I always do all my working, get the answer, and then when I finally answer the question in terms of the context, that's when I check, do I need to round this to the nearest hundredth or hundred? Do I need units? All of those sort of questions. And they're the easy marks lost in exams. Now, there's a different type of commission as well that you do need to know. It's part of the glossary, so I'm just making sure I include it, which is the stepped commission. This is very similar to sort of a tax situation where the tax percentage is stepped depending on what you earn. You may have heard your parents or people talk about tax brackets. That's like a stepped percentage table example. So this is stepped commission. So in some cases, commission may be stepped. This is very common for real estate agents. This is where as they sell things, they get a higher percentage of the lower sales, and as they progress, they get less and less percent. Obviously, if you're getting 3% of $1 million house, that's a significant portion of the sales, so they sort of step it back. So let's have a look at this agency. If they sold a house that's worth $450,000, how much commission are they actually going to receive? So what we need to do is break up the $450,000 to suit their steps. So first of all, we look at how they've stepped it out. So in this case, they've stepped out the first $100,000. So we're looking at $450,000. Okay, they're stepping out. The first step is $100,000. All right. The next step is the next $150,000. Now that still is in this $450,000 range, so that will take us from $100,000 all the way to $250,000. That's our next step. Oops, an extra zero there. Then the next $150,000 we need to work out, does it actually fit? Yes, it does. So then we'll have $250,000 all the way to $400,000. Now the last bit, so we've sort of, if I go back and highlight, so that's the first section, the second section, the third section. Basically they get 1% of anything more than that. So we're looking at, well, between the $400,000 to the $450,000, which is the extra part that we have, we're looking at, well, they'll get that extra amount. So in terms of calculations, we're going to have 3%. So again, I'm going to convert that to a decimal. 3% of 100,000, and we're going to add that to our 0.025 of our 150,000 there, and then we're going to add that to the 2%, so 0.02 times the next 150,000, and then finally the last step, we're going to do 0.01 times just the extra 50,000, so the extra step, and then we add that all together. So we're doing an addition of all of those, and that comes out at your $10,250. So this real estate agency for selling a house for $450,000 will get $10,250 because they sold the house. So we're going to look at percentage profit and loss. Profit is when you buy something and you sell it for more than what you've bought it for, and loss is when you bought something and you sell it for less than what you bought it for. Obviously, most industries are looking to make a profit, but we need to have a profit or a way to define profit that can be compared with across the board with all different products. So what we need to take into consideration is how much the product cost and what percentage of the cost did you actually make. That's where percentage profit and loss come about. So each of them have a formula, but they're both very similar. You can see that the big difference between the two is the word, obviously profit there and loss there. So profit made over the amount paid for the item times 100, or loss made over the amount paid for the item times 100. So this comes in handy when you have that problem where someone said they've made $30 profit, You want to know how good is that $30 profit, how much did they pay for the item, etc. So let's work with this $30 profit idea. All right, let's say the first example says that they bought it for $40 and they sold it for, they made a profit of $30. Well, let's use the percentage profit formula. If they bought it for, they made $30 profit and they bought it for 40 times 100, that gives them a percentage profit of 75%, which is quite significant. They've sold it for 75% of what it was worth to start with. So that was quite good. What if we said we bought it for $300 and we made a $30 profit? So we sold it for $330. Well, then we have to go 30, which is the profit, over the original 300 times 100. In that case, they only made a 10% profit. So you can see that saying $30 profit is not comparable because we don't know what we sold it for. That's why we commonly use percentage profit, percentage loss. Just be aware you will have to work out the profit if you're given what they sold it for and what they bought it for. Just a quick revision. That the profit over here equals the sale price, subtract the cost. The loss is the cost, subtract the sale price. We want absolute terms. We only want positive terms. We don't want a negative coming in. So it's literally how much money you lost. We're not saying we sold it for negative this amount. Okay, it's always absolute. Okay, simple interest. Now this is something you should have come across in year 9 and done a little bit more work on in year 10. So as a quick revision, there are 2 different formulae for simple interest, depending again if you use percentage or if you use a decimal. So we've got PRT over 100 or just PRT. Again, this is where R would be a percentage and this is where R would be a decimal. Okay, again, obviously I'm encouraging you to use a decimal. However, your Casio has it as PRT over 100, so you can use the percentage if you use your Casio e-activity. In a calculator assumed section, however, it'd be much quicker to use just a scientific calculator for these sorts of equations. So we need to make sure a few things, that time in years, we need to make sure it is in years. Remember the simple conversions. If we have time in months, okay, to get months to years, we need to divide by 12. Okay, we divide by 12. If we need to do days to years, we need to divide by 365. Basically, you need to divide by how many there are in a year. Okay, if we're doing quarterly, then we're going to divide by 4, etc. So however many there are in a year, divide by that amount. So you must have time in years. It's very, very important. And what's your rate, etc. Now, the only time this gets a bit trickier is, of course, if they ask for the time, the rate, or the principal instead of solving for the interest. Now, the quick conversions are basically these formulae here. Now, obviously, if you're happy to use the rate as a decimal, you don't need this times 100 business here. If you have the rate as a percentage, then you can use it that. With the e-activity, obviously that allows you to solve for the different variables very easily. If you're not comfortable with the rearrangements, you can just use your e-activities. Most of the time, this is a calculator assumed section. Occasionally, they throw it in the non-calc, and that's when you really need to be up to date with your dividing your decimals. Normally, they use quite nice numbers, though, so it should be very easy. Comes down to 3/4 or something very easy to convert. So we'll just try one quick question. So we're given this. The best thing to do is go through the question and highlight what you know. I like to set my questions up. You might see this if you do physics. And you set your variables that you're looking for down the side. And as you read the question, you read for those variables. So So how much interest? So straight away I know because of this first how much interest, I'm going to be looking for the interest. That's going to be my question. Is due after 10 months. Okay, so the next part, the 10 months, hopefully you're clicking that it needs to be in years. So the time is going to be 10 over 12 to convert that to a year. The principal is next, an investment of $125,000. So that's going to be your principal. And finally, the 4.7% per annum. Obviously, this wasn't too tricky a question, but just going through that and rewriting your variables down can help you sort it out. Also, my suggestion is if you put that straight into your e-activity, this is good working for your test. Some students struggle when they use the Casio, they don't know what working to show. That would be enough working to show for your Casio. So putting that into the formula, we're going to have interest equals, now it's P times R times T. So we're going to have 120,000 multiplied by 0.047 as a decimal times your 10 over 12. Okay, putting that into our calculator, and we get the 4895.83 recurring. Obviously, in the context of the question, we need to give our answer to the nearest cent. We want dollar signs, so therefore the interest due would be $4,895.83 to the nearest cent.